fine. Ninaho, Kankanto Chokesachek. My name is Larry Spotted Crow Man of the Hassanamesit band of Nipmuc people and the co-director of the Oki'teo Cultural Center. And I'm here today with my relatives who are making a traditional Mishoon in conjunction with the Massachusetts people here in Massachusetts homelands in Boston, now called Boston. And this is really a significant event spiritually, emotionally, historically, especially this being October 31st. Most people think of Halloween right now, but this is also a very solemn time for the Nipmuc people and other native people in this area. In 1675, many of our tribal people known as the Praying Indians, and what the Praying Indians were were native people who were rounded up and forcibly converted to Christianity into this what I call a militarized form of Christianity, where they had to cut their hair, they had to speak English, they couldn't practice their culture. It was outlawed in so many facets. This was the forerunner to the boarding and residential schools. So this was the beginning stages of how the U.S. government would form these types of systems and relocation camps to educate our people and take away their identity and their culture and who they are. And so what happened is that back in 1675 there was this war for the continent of this area called the King Philip's War, which essentially was about the indigenous people here having had put up with enough of their land being taken, all their rights, much like these praying towns, were being propped up. They still wanted to be able to practice their traditions and their culture, but it was becoming more and more outlawed. And so our people were fed up, and the leader of who led this resistance, Massachussett's son, known as King Philip, Metacom, would lead this resistance and fight for our rights. Now, however, the Praying Indians, as they're referred to, were already on these villages, and they were forced to sign a truce. So they were kind of not in the war per se, as it were, but of course there was a lot of moving around and things that were happening behind the scenes that people didn't know about. But for the most part, these Praying Indians were there in these villages and were said to stay out of the war. You know, don't take sides with your relatives. But that wasn't good enough for the colonists, the whites, because they said, well, they're still Indians and we still can't trust them. So what I think we need to do is round them up and keep them somewhere where we know they're not going to defend and fight for their rights. So the Massachusetts General Court ordered a decree to round up all these Praying Indians, which were in towns like Natick, Punkapaug, Grafton, Lancaster, different areas where all these Indians who are in these little villages where they've already cut their hair and were speaking English and were reading the Bible. But of course that wasn't good enough, so they were rounded up, shackled about the neck and legs, and ferried down the Charles River out into Deer Island. And it was in October on this date that they were taken, and they were put on this desolate island, Deer Island as it was called, and with no food, no provisions, no shelter, and many starved to death and froze to death. And those who didn't starve and freeze to death were regularly taken into slavery because they were still as we call them, pirate ships and renegade ships who were scouring these islands, who were capturing native people and taking them off to the Caribbean and putting them into slavery. So this was an ongoing thing. So they were under merciless attack from starvation, from renegade vessels taking them into slavery, and it was an extreme hardship for our people. And we see this again pop up many years later during the war, where the Japanese people were interned who have done nothing wrong to America. But what's significant here is going all the way back to what happened with the indigenous people, is that it was never, an apology was never made, right, to these people who were taken out here against their will, they were non-combatants, right? That's a very important distinction. They were non-combatant indigenous people who were taken out to this island, died, lost all their livelihood, their families, and so the United States has never apologized for that. And we continue to honor, we continue to have our traditional paddle. We go down the Charles River out into the ocean and make our way back to Deer Island in memory of our ancestors. So it's a very, very solemn time for us to remember that. And again, we really want to bring awareness to what's happened here, what continues to happen. And many of those survivors, it's also important to mention that, is how we got here. Those who survived Deer Island are people like the Pegan, who also go into the Vickers and the Doris. And so after, near the end of the war, after folks like Massachusett, King Philip was murdered and taken to Boston, and much like you see right there, this is what they did to King Philip, this is what they did to Massachusett, this is what they did to many of the Nipmuc leaders. And I know there's so much history to talk about here, so it seems like I'm sharing a lot. Don't get overwhelmed, do the research. It's important to mention that leaders like Massachusett, who came in under a truce, was taken to Boston Common and drawn and quartered, right where we now have our picnics and food trucks. Many Indian people were hung and drawn and quartered there. Their body parts were separated and hung on poles there, where we now have our food carts and music and all this festivities there. But it's an important distinction to keep in mind that many of the Deer Island people who were taken out did survive. When we did get off that island, we went to Natick, back to Newton, places in Newton, then Natick, and then back to Grafton. And we're those survivors here today. Many of us here today because all the natives, all our Nipmuc relatives who were out there fighting, most of them were killed or sent off to the Bahamas. So there are very few folks who survived that, who were perhaps hiding and different things like that. But for the most part, all the indigenous Nipmuc people who are here today were those survivors from that island. And some of the few pockets of families that were maybe in Wampanoag and Quabog and things like that. And so it's really exciting to be out here with my relatives here, Anawan, Andre, Strong, Bearheart, Deshaun, and the Massachusetts folks here, sharing that medicine with them and you know, continue to be part of the family. And and all of our people here just doing this wonderful thing. And yourself here doing the video, thank you so much. Yeah, it's really an honor to be here, to share in this traditional way. And what you're seeing here is a traditional burning of our, we don't say canoe, we call it Mishoon. And it's a ceremony. It's a process that goes on where you see everybody working there using the traditional methods of carving it out. And this reminds us that everything we do as indigenous people, it's a family, it's ceremony, it's coming together in community. The idea of individuality is not part of our culture. And so when we think about our people, we're thinking about coming together and doing things. Unlike capitalism, it's all about every man for himself and go find your destiny. And for us, it's about go find your family and be with your people. You know, so it's a big difference. And so I'm really excited to be here. I had to get out here and sharing this. So I hope you folks do your research about the Massachusetts people, Nipmuc, the Mashpee, learn about what happened here, learn true history, you know, and just a big thank you to all the collaborators out there, people like Bunker Hill Community College, Double Edge Theater, all the folks who are collaborating with the indigenous people who are making this possible. Thank you.